Here, Michael. Come to me.
What does a young want-to-be witch who lives on an isolated farm with a demonic goat, a pair of sexually frustrated lighthouse keepers in the throes of madness and paranoia, a would-be leader cast out by his uncle who murders his father in cold blood, and a horny demon-summoning woman who has the worst sleep paralysis in history? Well, aside from Willem Dafoe, in most of those, the only constant is the man, the myth, and the legend Robert Eggers. There's been a lot of conversation in the film industry from the perspective of viewers and consumers around the lack of earnesty in films. The conversation about films nowadays has been broadly negative for a variety of reasons. A lot of people will have you believing that films are worse because of forced inclusion, because the technicality has gotten worse. We're watching less effective stories because everything has become less original and less interesting. Characters are one-dimensional, etc., etc. What I find absolutely fascinating about Eggers' Nosferatu is how it's more or less guilty of most of those things. It just doesn't matter because he is so fiercely earnest and confident in his work that it just sort of shuts people up. It's shot arrestingly simple. Its music is never bombastic. The story and characters are about as cookie cutter original as you can get. And yet everyone loves the film, and I'm one of them. Now, Nosferatu is hardly a subversion film, you know what I mean? It's not really a surprising film to dissect the plot of. If you've read Bram Stoker's Dracula, if you've watched any of the three massively popular and cult classics of the adaptation, like 1922 Nosferatu Symphony of Darkness, 1979's Nosferatu the Vampire, or 2000's Shadow of the Vampire, Van Helsing. Look, this story has been adapted 9 ways from Sunday, so if by some miracle of God's good grace you somehow managed to avoid spoiling it for yourself, I'll keep the plot summary pretty brief, and I'm just only going to go over sort of the entries. Nicholas Hoult and Lily Rose Depp play newlyweds Thomas and Ellen Hutter. But prior to witnessing the pair in their lovey-dovey current-day throes, we witness the beginning of Ellen's fascination with a shadowy figure that bears more resemblance to a demon than to a man. The stakes are set rather high, and Depp's spine-crackingly good physical embodiment of the character is evident in this opening scene and only increases in intensity the further in we get. But going back to the current day, Thomas is a real estate advisor working in a firm that seems all too eager to send him off to the faraway land of Transylvania from his cozy home in Germany, and the ulterior motive of his boss Herr Nock is there for all but Thomas to see. Now, the issue arises with the recurring nightmares that Ellen has been having and leading to full-on seizures in the middle of the night, sleepwalking and talking to someone who isn't there. Knowing that this stress is far too much for her to bear alone, Thomas sends Ellen to stay with his close friends Friedrich and Anne Harding, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin, respectively. From there, it's off to Transylvania, where Thomas is to meet with the reclusive Count Orlok, who's stowed away in a castle that would make the beast blush with jealousy. And along the way, he's scared senseless by some of the locals practicing a ritual meant to ward off some unknown evil. His horse goes missing, he's hunted by wolves, but eventually he does make it to his destination. As Thomas traverses the castle grounds in a daze, his brain befuddled and buried by Orlok's enigmatic power and presence, he finally comes face to face with the man behind the name. Now, I'll leave the remainder of the plot for you to experience yourself. You probably won't be overly surprised by any of the twists and turns that it takes, but frankly, you won't even care because you'll be so enraptured by the characters that whatever peril they go through seems almost ancillary to the joy of watching their performances as they go through them. Just kind of the point of film. As a quick aside, something that I find quite funny about the discourse around Nosferatu because I kind of went out of my way to see what other people were saying around the time that I was writing the script. And what I love is how all the right-wing doomsday naysayers that parade and pretend at being film critics or, in their description, self-ascribe themselves as movie connoisseurs have mysteriously not bothered to review or even mention Nosferatu. I mean, the only one out of that group is Critical Drinker, and yet if you watch his review, it doesn't really feel like he actually watched the movie. He sort of only talks about 3 characters and gives a plot summary that's again tit for tat the original movie, which you can find from plugging this whole thing into ChatGPT or just giving a cursory Google search. And he only talks about 3 characters, and then he sort of just seems to forget that there's another 5 or so actors who all turn in stellar performances, and he just sort of forgets to mention any of them. And speaking of one of the characters he forgets to mention, Lily Rose Depp deserves all of the praise she's getting from fans and critics for her incredibly physical performance in this film. While yes, if you are a consistent viewer, you already know this, I am a huge Sam Levinson hater, and I thought The Idol was just about the epitome of self-righteous bait that he could have made, but Lily was never the issue. If anything, she was the exception to that god-awful series rule. And if you're still unconvinced of her range after watching Nosferatu, despite how different it is from The Idol, then you're as blind as a bat and as deaf as Helen Keller. Her embodiment of the tortured young woman who goes through everything from intense insomnia to an exorcism that would make Emily Rose turn pale, she nails every moment of it. Not only vocally and dramatically, but as mentioned before, she basically contorts her body into like every position and spasm that the human body is not meant to do. One moment she's all innocent or world weary, and the next she's, tearing at her dress like it's suffocating her while screaming her fears into reality, and it's just mesmerizing. Surprisingly enough, in this movie, an actor that I've been very meh on for years, Nicholas Hoult, he's had a pretty good year, and he really cemented himself as someone to watch in the coming years. If none of you watched Juror Number 2 or The Order or even like The Menu, then you're missing out. Nosferatu saw Holt playing a role that is decidedly different from his usual outings. He plays Thomas with such a conviction that it's hard not to root for the guy or feel awful for him, even when you're kind of like internally screaming at him to make better decisions and get the fuck out of the castle. And much like Depp, he turns in a very physical performance that has him levitating in the air, being chased by wolves, jumping into a river, being spiritually and physically assaulted and tortured, and the man sells every moment. Now, I don't want to dedicate this entire video to just the acting, especially because we need to talk about how Eggers draws you in and just mesmerizes you until the credits roll. But just know that Ralph Ineson, Willem Dafoe, and Emma Corrin all turn in excellent performances as well. But what does Eggers do that just glues your eyes to the screen and makes turning away for a millisecond or performing the natural human urge and need to blink feel like a mortal sin for missing even a fraction of what he's made and what he's showing to you? Why is it that his films, despite their relative weirdness, strange ideas, and executions, just feel and look so damn arresting? Is it his reliance on natural lighting? His impeccable sound design, the desire to create a unique visual style for each story he tells, doing something different outside of the established norms of the industry? Is it a combination of all of those things, or maybe something else? Within the limited confines of my own understanding of film as an art form, really cementing what it is about Eggers that makes his film so captivating would be his visual themes, the mystery of his moments and the story beats, and finally his use of color. Yes, his sound design is always excellent. What makes a moment like this so fascinating, despite being a standard hero hears prophecy and so knows their purpose story beat? One of these things is the use of language. It's deliberately coarse and enigmatic, drawing both the viewer and Amleth into the moment. It makes your brain and ears strain to understand what is being said. But then, I want you to ignore your ears. Just use your eyes. Look at the way cinematographer Yaren utilizes moonlight and deep shadows to emphasize the strangeness of the moment. Do you feel it? Do you feel that creeping dread up your spine? That prickling sensation in your heart that tells you that this isn't a natural moment, but you can't quite pinpoint the problem? The ache in your brain like you're witnessing the birth of a horrific myth? Take that feeling, distill it, harness it, and feel it. Become familiar with that feeling. Make friends with it, call out to it in the dark, and then surrender yourself to that oppressive darkness that makes that friend disappear and replaces it with the cold terror of the unknown. You're alone in that darkness. That is the power of Nosferatu. Eggers and Yaren managed to make moonlight look like something that is only spoken of in hushed whispers around a campfire. A startling myth that would gather an equal amount of gasps in a crowded peasant tavern as it would derision in a court. A thing to be enchanted by, but also fear utterly. Because without moonlight, without light at all, shadows couldn't spread. And in Nosferatu, we should all fear the shadows. They betray the presence of something sinister, something that we don't speak of. Something so ancient and evil, you have to retread centuries of recorded history to even find mention of it. Nosferatu pulls off the near impossible, a feat that only a handful of horror films can even boast of accomplishing. It makes you fear the light as much as you fear the dark. There is no safety from the hand of Orlok, no bedsheet thick enough to drown out his villainous visage, no closet deep enough to shrink back from his penetrating nails, no torch bright enough to burn away his awful shadow. And there is light aplenty in the morning hours of Egger's depiction of Germany and Transylvania. Cobblestones cast their textured shadows across the street, windows smudged by grime and dirt spread these overblown exposures of sunlight and bathe the room in a pale bright white. As a matter of fact, the daylight is so blown out, it feels unnatural, almost as though we are meant to fear the approach of night. It feels more welcoming sometimes than the alternative, putting us, the viewer, so effectively into the mindset of madness and horror that we feel turned around, sideways, confused, and dizzy. This isn't right. The daybreak is supposed to make you feel safe. It's supposed to make you feel like there's a reprieve for even a few moments. This is present throughout Nosferatu. From the claustrophobic terror of Orlok's castle to the moonlit-struck interiors of German households and even to these wide-open establishing shots of the Demeter or the town itself. Nothing feels entirely natural. Everything feels a little too unreal, like you're in one of Ellen's dreams for the whole time. Almost as though you're not really awake, but still aware of what you're watching. All of this is accomplished without sacrificing the mystery at the center of Nosferatu. Like I briefly mentioned, this mystery, this enigma in The Northman is so omnipresent in his other films, like The Lighthouse and The Witch, that it really is like going through a folktale firsthand. I mean, it's no secret that The Lighthouse was highly influenced by the myth and legend of the Elan Moor Lighthouse that saw 3 lighthouse keepers mysteriously vanishing and spurring decades of speculation and mythology. Nosferatu maintains its efficacy of myth and mystery by both visually and vocally keeping Orlok and his powers at the fringe of the audience's understanding. We see him extend his shadow and make things happen. We hear his words having an effect on Ellen and Friedrich, and yet, even though none of this is explained or given exposition, we understand it? I mean, it makes complete sense, but it really shouldn't. Eggers is simply so good and so confident at confounding your senses that you will believe anything he tells you. You don't need to know how Orlok works. You don't need to know how Ellen summoned him, and you don't need to know how Thomas makes it through his ordeals. Now, at the end of those moments, you completely understand why they happened, and the how is there if you want to find it, but you don't really want to. And why don't you want to? Because things are far more frightening when you don't understand how they work, and Eggers understands that. This is why Nosferatu is so damn frightening and is so damn mesmerizing. We don't understand why the moonlight is shown the way it is. When have you ever seen in the real world outside of art that the moon is so bright and so blue that it cascades the whole landscape in swaths of blue and white, covering the details in a series of just popping over exposures that make you want to look at nothing else except at the encroaching shadows that tug at the edges of that moonlight like a pack of starving dogs. We don't understand how Ellen is being tormented by these nightmares, as eventually so does Thomas, Friedrich, and to a degree his wife Anne. These night terrors are so real that the reality between the waking state and the nightmare-infused sleeping state blur together into shades of confusion and horror. How can we trust these visions if the nightmares come true? But if they aren't always true, why are we afraid of them? And it's on a screen, so it can't hurt us. Nosferatu, despite all my praise for it and how I believe it is Eggers' best depiction of his creativity and a masterclass in making the audience uncomfortable without being bombastic and laden with jump scares, is not my favorite Eggers film. This shouldn't surprise anyone who knows me in person, but it might surprise those stumbling across this video or this channel for the first time. Here's the thing though. It may not be my favorite, but I meant what I said. This is Eggers at his most devilish, his most vindictive, his most frightening, his most reserved, his most effective, and by far his most mythological. Nosferatu is a masterpiece of style and substance. It makes the most out of only a few locations. It bathes the frame in shadows, moonlight, and single-sourced lighting by fire. It's shot so impeccably well that even when something fantastical is happening, it'll have you widening your eyes and dropping your jaw as though you believe this could have happened in real life. It is written so intelligently and succinctly that it gives these incredible actors a huge range of dramatic emotions to go through. The pure physicality of the actors going through metaphorical hell and emotional hell as they battle this otherworldly demonic vampire is wince-inducing in the best way. This is a film made by a man so in touch with his creativity and so utterly confident in the skill set of his crew and cast that he made myth proper frightening for the first time since people believed in ghosts and haunted houses 200 years ago. This film will have you staring into the shadows, wondering who is there, who could possibly be getting ready to enter your dreams and steal your blood. The cinematography will have you in awe at the use of incredible colors and lighting that brings this folktale to life in a way that feels like a history lesson rather than a story told to frighten ignorant listeners. The acting will have you squirming in your seat in fear that you don't think the human body is meant to do that, or have you so emotionally invested that you'd go to war for these people if it meant their happiness. And that is how Eggers draws you in. With this incredible framing, this incredible writing, this incredible lighting, this incredible buildup of atmosphere and tone, this insane talent behind the camera, this insane talent in front of the camera, and the confidence that makes you believe every minute of it. This is how it feels to be hypnotized.